destruction, the only solution. No use, you can't stop that. Ain't no use, you can't stop it. Ain't no use, no one can stop that now. Can't stop them now. No one can stop them now. To say bye-bye. Ain't no use. Ain't no use. No one can stop them now. No one can stop them.
Welcome back to the Professor Penn podcast. David Penn here. Episode number 148, NASRALLAH Must Die. Coming to you on Tuesday night, October 1st, 7:30 p.m. Central Standard Time. Tanner and I are in the studio here on Monday morning, 30th September, 7 a.m., recording a day ahead. So who knows what's going to happen between Monday morning and when this goes up Tuesday night. It could become moot. We don't know. Good morning, Tanner.
Good morning, David.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
I am trying to entice Tanner to come to the gym with me. Why do I do this? Well, I have my stepson, a young, fully functional man, coming to the gym with me. He's about, he's 15. And he looks at me and goes, "How do you do that?" Hey, it's getting kind of boring. He always gives up on me. So I thought I'd lure Tanner in there and smoke his ass next, just for fun. You know, at my age, these are the simple pleasures that you get as you decline and decay. You still get to kick the ass of some young people. But I know there's some young people out there that can kick my ass. I was out over the weekend. You know, Royce and I barnstormed the state a little bit this weekend, going to many different events. I was out at the Twins game, the street team, and this is very important. One of the things that we figured out, you know, it goes back to Susan. You know, Susan, the first time she showed up in the live chat, Susan, I'm going to mention her last name because I respect her, Susan Harris. The first time she ever showed up in the live chat, the first thing she ever put in the live chat was, "To the streets." And I just can't forget that because at the time, Susan, I was really not in that place. And then we did a couple marches to the Fed, and I recognized, particularly because the Minneapolis Republicans went wild, that we were going to walk through Minneapolis like we were going to cause the end of the city. We're causing riots. Just American citizens getting together in a peaceful march on the sidewalks from a park to the Fed. They attacked the march like it was some kind of provocative act. And it occurred to me from the time Susan first put that in the live chat, and as I watch how this thing is developing, because I'm actually in the streets all the time now, what I'm recognizing is that the American citizens that follow the philosophy of republicanism, let's leave the Republican Party out of it, because they're only about half Republicans. But those that follow the party of republicanism have ceded the streets to the communists and the fascists since the 30s. And that's not a surprise, or even the 20s. I mean, it's really not a surprise. No, we had a comeback. Well, you know, you could say it's not a comeback because, you know, there was so much street violence in Europe in the 20s and 30s and, you know, going back to the Bolshevik Revolution. It was very dangerous in the streets. And the Republicans retreated to their homes and their television sets. And there was a resurgence of street activity by what I would consider righteous people in the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s. But that was a movement of the left. Uh, that was a movement of the left. Now, I'll make the comment that anti-war civil right energy is now to be found within the Republican movement, and that the Democrat movement has become Darwinist, warmongering corporatists, um, New World Order sycophants. You know, that's just my opinion. I think I could go on for another 150 podcasts. This is episode number 148. We can do another 150 proving that the left has gone from, center left, liberal, pro civil rights, pro free speech, pro human well being, anti war, anti military industrial complex. It's gone from that where it started to full blown communist. And they have control of the streets, as we saw during the first Trump administration. And I'm in the streets, and I'll tell you, it's an experience to be there. Um, that's why I'm going to the gym. I mean, it's you got to be able to deal with it. I have to be able to deal with it, and I'm not looking for violence, but there's some very uh, confrontational characters that emerge. And what's interesting about these people is they really don't want to talk. They just want to scream or make allegations or make statements. And then when you try to engage with them, there's no negotiation, there's no talking. So, in a relationship, when the talking ends, when there's no communication, that doesn't bode well for reaching synthesis. The way our politics is intended to work is we have a, two-party system, which even the founding fathers didn't want that. So let's cancel the party idea. Let's say two people talking. I have an opinion. I make it. I make a statement, a thesis. The person I'm talking to makes another statement. Perhaps it's an antithesis. And then you have synthesis. And that is a kind of a Hegelian dialectic. And I realize the Hegelian dialectic is in disfavor, in the conservative movement. But just in terms of just forget about the philosophical ideas, just two people communicating. If we talk, I say something, you say something back to me, and I listen to you, perhaps you'll say something that moves me if I'm listening, and it will bring us to a better understanding of policy. Like, for example, I'm really trying to understand this Middle East thing. I'm trying to understand it so I have something novel to say. And I'm just going to keep working on it and saying things and listening to the feedback. Because if we stay in the place we're at, there's not much hope here. I remember, and I've talked about this, and it's worth saying again, in 1978, I met a very interesting Palestinian man. First name happened to be Jihad, and we became very good friends. And actually, believe it or not, he was going to be the first Palestinian on the Israeli Olympic team in 1972. And as I said, the boys visited him and said, if you're not out of the country in 24 hours, you die and your whole family dies. And he had a big family, lots of brothers and sisters. So he was like Taco Bell. He ran for the border, and he ended up in the United States. And of course, in 72, there was the Munich massacre. So that explained why they didn't want him to go. And he was a sportsman. He was a great athlete, great martial artist. He was a Greco-Roman wrestler who got involved in the martial arts. And I mean, back in those days, man, the martial arts were super rough in the 60s and 70s. When I say rough, I mean rough. And then they got a little bit more well-being orientated in the 80s and 90s and the 2000s as people started to see the Marshall Path as a way of human well-being instead of just a way of self-defense or, defense. And now it's the UFC has taken over and it's gotten very intense again. My point is, when we trained, it was brutal training, brutal, bone breaking training. And I love training with the guy because he was such a good fighter. And he looked at me and he said one time, which was funny because Vin Diesel said it in another movie 20 years later. He said, "Man," he said, "I've been in 1,000 fights." And he said, "You want to be a good fighter, you got to fight." And he said, My skin's like leather because I've been hit so many times." And I thought a lot about that, and but we got friendly. And here's two people, and I had a thesis and he had a thesis, and we talked, and he had a very interesting idea, which is a little bit of an eschatological idea, which I didn't recognize at the time. I looked at it politically. He said that the United Nations could move from New York and to become centered in Jerusalem, and the Middle East, the Holy Land, could be the center of the world governance. Now, this goes back a long time before we had started to understand that the United Nations is, not necessarily our friends, that world government is not necessarily, in fact, it's not, because it gets governance too far from our neighborhoods. But even if you listen to Bob Marley, there was great hope, particularly in the global South, that the United Nations could redress the wrongs and the remaining vestiges of the colonial period. And this friend of mine, Jihad, had this idea of moving the United Nations there. And it was a good idea in 1978. It seems highly implausible today. And I think most of this audience would be suspicious of the United Nations. But again, that's not necessarily an indictment of the concept of the United Nations. That's an indictment of the people who come out of our academic institutions and seek a world governance of a certain kind of format and philosophy, which, you know, as I've said, seems to me to be proven to be false. The whole point of the enterprise was, how do we eliminate the possibility of genocide and world war? Well, that's very simple. Regulate it. So wars become regulated, and the United Nations Security Council controls the intensity of conflicts, when conflict happens, how conflict happens, and states that don't bow or bend their knee to this concept are labeled as pariah states, terrorist states, and then these states are sanctioned by this body and by the different members thereof. The idea being, let's not have a cataclysm, but a cataclysm is taking place right before our eyes, and we're going to talk about that tonight because Nasrallah must die. Reminds I came up with that. If anybody wants to go see a good movie, there's a movie called Romeo Must Die, starring not Bruce, Jet Li, and it's just a great martial arts movie. It's just a great movie, and I didn't really understand the title because the title is rather incongruous compared to the script. But when I watched Nasrallah die, I understood the title of the movie. But if you want to go watch a good Jet Li movie, Romeo Must Die. Now, since I saw you last, I got a comment from a viewer, from a listener on my YouTube comments about the music that I was choosing for the podcasts, and the viewer said that I was choosing music that was written by leftists. Therefore, I must be the controlled opposition. And I think he was responding to this Sam Cooke piece that I used in the last podcast. And There's a certain level where these labels really don't mean very much. You know, left, right, up, down. Um, there's really only two labels that matter to me, and that's freedom and tyranny, self-governance and tyranny, because that's really the binary choice that I see. We're either self-governing with maximum use of our free will to choose, or we're told what to do by human agency uh, because we're viewed as inventory. And I just view it in that sense. And all the other divisions, left, right, Republican, Democrat, liberal, conservative, I kind of look at them as not very informative because there are authoritarians sprinkled throughout the whole range of these ideologies, and they hide themselves within the ideologies. The choice is not clear. If the choice was clear, we could have a vote or we could make a choice that would be very definitive because people would understand. But clearly people don't understand. We were at a event in Faribault, Minnesota yesterday. It's about an hour south of the Twin Cities. And Royce was on a stage. There was a crowd in the park, and he just went off about a whole range of what I would consider to be, you know, fairly fundamental ideas in our history and our governance. But I recognized looking at this crowd that it was novel territory for that particular group of spectators. And it just saddens me because we've been dumbed down. We don't know our history. That's why we're doing the podcast together. I get to rediscover the history because I'm constantly studying and I get to share it with you. And, if we don't understand how this stuff fits together, we're just lost in a game somebody else put together for us to play in. And this YouTube commenter was very, I guess, condemning of me as controlled opposition for playing music that he felt was coming for the left. Well, I asked him, make some suggestions, and I ran this by some of my other, uh, associates, and people said, well, play Ted Nugent. Oh, great. Okay. Well, Ted's got a few good songs. We'll play some. I mean, there's good music across the whole spectrum, but let's just talk about music. Music, which I think is distinct from film. I mean, I play music. I don't say I've mastered the violin or the piano or my voice, but I walked down that road to try to master it, and I was close to mastery of the violin. Uh, Boy, I don't see music as left or right. I see music as an expression of the human spirit. I hear the voice as an expression of the human spirit. A lot of times, hey Tanner, do you ever listen to lyrics and the lyrics that you hear have nothing to do with what the lyrics actually are? Have you ever
Yeah.
done that?
Yeah.
Have we all done that?
Yeah.
We make up our own lyrics, right?
Yeah. We're always going to find a way to relate to music. So a specific song, we could pull something from it completely different than what the artist had intended.
Right.
Yeah.
So, we become co-creators of this music. I just want to say, I understand what this viewer was uh, positing. I don't agree that music that I would choose, and if it comes from a leftist source, would indicate that I'm the controlled opposition. Also, I don't view protest music or music that comes out of the civil rights movement, the civil rights movement music, or music about freedom or liberation or redemption to be left or right. There are certain things that are seen as being leftist that are only leftist because one thing turns into its opposite. We've When we go back and look at the history of the Republican Party, and still to this day, the anti-Semitism and racism that's in the Republican Party. And I say the Republican Party. It's not the party, it's the participants in the party. You go back into the 50s and 60s, this effort to form a more perfect union and to offer every citizen the civil rights that are offered them and are protected in our Bill of Rights and in our Constitution, this effort was in the left. It was in the Democrat Party. It was the Republican Party that was suddenly found resisting it, even though it was the Republican Party that was in power at the time of the Civil War. These ideas are complicated. That's why I say the labels, the groupings, it's really about the people. The people are in a mixed bag, like in our Republican Party. Still, we have people that want to maintain the military industrial complex, and that's their driving uh, energy to be Republicans. Even though it's very clear it's the Democrat Party that's the strongest defender of the military industrial complex at this time. This stuff, it's almost mind boggling. So, what we want to do is clarify our politics. When things are scrambled like this, they're scrambled so people can't figure it out. When you can't figure something out, like let's say you're trying to put something together, got some instructions, came in a box, you're trying to assemble something, you can't figure it out. Tanner, what do you do?
First, give it a break, and if I come back still can't fix it, then find a second mind to help me with it.
You give up,
Yeah.
right? You're basically saying, I give up.
Yeah, I would give up my attempt, but I would still be trying to get it done,
But no,
yes.
but I'm saying when we have politics that's so hopelessly conflict orientated, so full of division, and the divisions don't even make sense because they're intentionally with wedge issues meant to make things very opaque, very difficult to understand. And I think Royce made this point beautifully in Faribault because there was protesters there for women's reproductive health. And he said, this is not the most important issue right now today. I mean, it's just not. I mean, we're on the verge of a worldwide cataclysm, as we're going to be talking about. And, a woman's right to choose, a woman's right to have health care isn't going to mean a lot if we have a world war. It's going to become very secondary for women. They're going to suddenly become concerned about survival instead of optimization. The point is, geez, if I have a baby, my life can't be optimized. I don't want this child. Okay, you can't optimize when you're, at risk of being killed in a war. Nobody's optimizing. So we're being all dragged down to the level of survival. By who? The people that we elect, our elected representatives, are voting for legislation and for expenditures that's dragging our whole society down to survival level. And man, when you're at survival level, you got a whole other set of things you're thinking about. Here's an optimization moment. I was in the car with my stepson Bryden, and we drive to the club. Maybe I'll go to the club with Tanner soon. We're driving to the club. It's Saturday morning. It's early in the morning. We're the first people on the road. And I have him in the car for 15 minutes. I want to talk to him and use the time. Be an older source of information for him to think about. And we were talking about President Trump. And he said, President Trump was lucky. And I looked at him and I said, lucky? Did you think that was luck? He said, yeah, that was lucky. I said, Bryden, let me ask you a question. Instead of him missing, that shot missing him by millimeters and grazing his ear, if he'd been hit dead center and his head looked like a piñata, and we had to watch that over and over and over again, right? What would you call that? He goes, that'd have been evil. I go, evil. So if he got killed, it was evil. But when he survives, it's luck. What do you think about that? And he looked at me and said, well, I never thought about it quite like that. So if he gets killed, it's an awful, awful, terrible act. Evil. Called it evil. You see how it's so easy to lose sight of the potentially miraculous? Here's a young Catholic kid and he's seeing it as luck, happenstance. I don't. I don't know what it means in the big picture because I'm not privileged on the inside. I'm not sitting there knowing what the plan is. But I certainly say um, the president being alive is miraculous because we know of 2, maybe 3 attempts on his life, but there's actually many, many more attempts. And to say he's lucky, that's kind of Darwinist, isn't it? Like, we're here by accident. Just happened that way. Eh, I don't think so. And then that got me thinking I was at the club, and I'm looking around the club, and I'm thinking about because I'm there with Bryden at the club, and he got me into this kind of strange headspace where I'm realizing this young Catholic kid thinks it's luck that the president survived, and I'm looking at all the people in the club, and everybody's functioning. There's no violence in there. It's all good. It's all good. And I'm thinking, how many people in this club really, really are working on the search for truth? Am I the only person on the floor? Well, probably not, but maybe I am. I mean, this search for truth thing, this is not a minor league deal like, oh, I think I'm going to try to believe in God. No, this is for me, my I statement, for me, I am spending more and more of my um, intellectual time recognizing the way I've avoided the search for truth up until this point in my life and what I need to do to double it down and to really walk by faith and not by sight and to really give over to the plan and be the person that I would like to be in my world at this time. What do I have to do? Well, I'll tell you what I have to do. I have to give up my addiction to sin. And that's what all of us could consider doing. And that change on the inside would immediately manifest outside if we would all do that. And there's all kinds of ways that we fall short. And one of the biggest ones, I think, is we, the people of this country that believe in the Constitution and republicanism, have lost the courage. We lack the courage to be in the streets. So I have a request. Okay, it's an election. We're 35 days out. If you're in Minnesota, first, please let me ask you to vote. Let me ask you to spread out the podcast. All of you, please repost the podcast. We do great on Rumble. We do great on Getter. Great, growing all the time. But here on YouTube, because of course, as Royce said to me, I'm going to get suppressed more than Royce. Why? Because I'm a boomer that doesn't buy the program. Oh, that's dangerous, isn't it? You know, it's one thing to be a young, black militant, 30 years old. But when you're my age and you look at it for a lifetime and you know what went down and you say, this is a scam, I don't like this, of course I'm going to get repressed. Well, I want to spread this message. So if you could repost the links, thank you. Also, if you're in Minnesota and you go to roycewhite.us, there's a way to volunteer. We're forming a street team. A street team. What's a street team? A street team is like, oh, I don't know, in my wildest dreams, 1,000 people gather at places that we in the campaign say, we're all going to meet here at this time and place. And we all go there with Royce White for Senate t-shirts on, and we just stand there and wave. And we give permission to all the people that see us to join us. Because when no one's there, when it's just an idea, it's just an idea. That's one thing. You got to start someplace. First, there was the word. But when people actually show up and smile and wave and say, hey, we'll talk to you. Come join us. Let's meet each other. Let's have an interview. We're actually a growing movement. And first it's 500, then 1,000, then 2,000, 3,000 people. We're just not taking this very seriously. And if we kid around and fool around, we have to recognize, look at like just here in Minneapolis, after the George Floyd event, the hundreds of thousands of people that went into the streets. Do we not believe in our principles? Do we not want to advertise for self-governance, for freedom, that I am the king? I mean, I think a lot of people are going to like this if they recognize that the philosophy of republicanism makes them the sovereign of their own life. Hey, that's hard to get on the other side. No, I'd like to be a slave. Okay, we're going to have some people like that. I'll never forget, I was teaching one time, and I was talking about optimization and survival. And one of the participants said, I don't want to optimize. I just want to survive. Well, I guess it's out there. And my final preamble today, before we get into to NASRALLAH Must Die, is the divisions in the American national movement. Man, we're not even out of the blocks yet, and we can't get along with each other. And all I have to say is, we're not very serious. So I'm watching on the campaign. I'm watching an SD-45, the first nationalist BPOU, political operating unit, the first nationalist in the entire CD3, Congressional District 3 in Minnesota. And I'm watching all the other nationalists all over everywhere. And, we can't get along about anything. Right in the middle of this deal, people are arguing and backbiting and striving with each other. And I just know from this that people are not taking this worldwide communist takeover seriously at all. They think it's all going to work out. Why? Hey, the Vikings did great yesterday. They're 4-0. The Minnesota Vikings are 4-0. They were up 28-0 at the end of two quarters, and they squeaked out a victory 31-28. Unbelievable. They're 4-0. So entertaining. We all have Vikings fever here in Minnesota. And who cares? It's just bread and circuses. So as long as we can do that and listen to Spotify and plug into Netflix, I guess life's pretty good, right? And when all of the um, amenities of the technological life are stripped away from us and we're left being governed by tyrants, we need to remember I had a chance. Now, what I'm doing is I'm taking my chance. I'm going to the streets. And hey, where's the 30-year-olds and the 20-year-olds, the people that want to govern their own lives, that want their children to be well? Please. So go to roycewhite.us, follow the street team, and let's start to get people coming out. And this is going to go on after the election. I will be out there by myself. I ordered my peace symbol hats this week, and I got baseball hats coming with peace symbols. I'm just going to stand there with a peace symbol. Just stand there. Let people think about the fact that while they're not paying attention, the first thing that pops in my mind, because it's so awful and serious, that was the death of Nasrallah, the leader of Hezbollah. They bombed that suburb there, and with these bunker buster bombs. And this man is really revered in his cohort, in his following, and he's dead as a doornail now. But it occurred to me, those bombs were supplied by the Biden administration to the Israeli government. I have a question for you as a young man. Do you think that that's good for the environment when all that debris goes up into the sky? Isn't that kind of strange? We're all about banding together to stop global climate change because it's going to kill everybody. But let's not let that get in the way of a good military expenditure. Because when they turn that inventory, it's time for another $8 billion of rearmament. That has got to be bad if you believe that man is changing the climate and the climate change is going to kill everybody. Why would they be allowing the use of weapons that create that kind of environmental degradation? Am I missing something?
Yeah, like they want to get rid of gas cars. Let's make it all electric. But in the military, what-
Mm.
they would have to come to the table and go, guys, let's go back to swords.
That's
We
a great.
can't do these
I'm
bombs
all
anymore.
for that. That's a.
We
You
can't
see how
do
this
these
works with
bombs.
thesis and counter-thesis? I would love, people would try this, it'd never work. Can't put the genie back in the bottle. But I think we need to start a whole new climate change initiative. We're going back to hand-to-hand combat,
Yeah.
right?
Swords only. I want to see cannon bolts, everything. back.
Environmental friendly weaponry. That's a great idea.
Yeah.
It's a whole new business.
Another thing too that you don't even think about for the environmental piece is think all the machinery that has to clean up that mess now and then reconstruct it. That's a whole other plethora of
It's a whole other loan.
yeah.
It's a whole other payment system. It's a whole other set indebtedness. It's a whole way to saddle up these poor Lebanese people with debt slavery for generations, right? And it's their fault for letting Hezbollah take over their country. So they should pay,
Could you
right?
explain that for me? Because I don't understand that. What
Well, when you said that there's a whole machinery that has to come in and rebuild the area.
yeah.
Okay, this place is poor. It has no money. I mean, if left to their own devices, that place is going to be bombed out for 100 years. But that's not what's going to happen. International institutions are going to come in and they're going to say, we'd be happy to lend you the money to rebuild. We'll even bring in contractors to rebuild it for you. But it's going to have some costs. We're going to have to tax your people, your port. We own your port now. Oh, this iron ore mine, that's ours. Oh, that oil field, that's ours. In other words, it's a quid pro quo. Nothing's for free. Come on, after all. It does cost money to rebuild.
Yeah.
So there's a whole rebuilding industry that's led by companies you know the name of, like BlackRock and State Street. That's what they're into. First, they get paid for blowing it up, and then they get paid for building it back. And then if you're like in the Ukraine, which has been a piñata for decades, you can do it over and over again. It's the gift that keeps on giving. It's fantastic. What a business model. What a business model. And then if the Lebanese people fall short, because, after all, colonialism, they were a colony of the French. To make this right, I guess we people here in the United States need to pay for it with foreign aid. So I'm looking at these pictures of these poor people in the Carolinas that got devastated by this hurricane, and they're crying their eyes out because the cavalry's not coming. Well, hey, the Biden-Harris administration has got billions for this war effort. Hezbollah on Saturday confirmed that Hassan Nasrallah, its longtime leader, had been killed after Israeli airstrikes slammed into the area housing its underground headquarters near Beirut. The underground headquarters, of course, were in a civilian neighborhood, so there were lots of civilian casualties. And, if you're going to let your army hide amongst the civilians, there's going to be civilian casualties. The killing of Mr. Nasrallah, a towering figure among anti-Israel forces across the Middle East and beyond, struck a tremendous blow to Hezbollah and in an era of the Lebanese group's decades-old fight with Israel and raising questions about its future. Well, that's a big deal. He was a spiritual leader as well as a military leader and a political leader. The word is that the elimination of the Hezbollah leadership has basically rendered the organization moot. They're not going to be able to fight, and unconfirmed reports now available to me are indicating that Israel is now entering Lebanon and starting a ground war. It's not the first time they've been in Lebanon before. They're going into Lebanon to push the Hezbollah fighters off the northern Israel border, possibly all the way to the Litani River. We've seen this before. It's a very bloody and involved activity, but the Israelis do seem quite intent on changing what they call the reality on the ground. So, uh, okay. Meanwhile, Iran has been saying no more war because they're watching the military supremacy of the Israeli Air Force, and they don't want any part of it because they really don't have much of an answer to it, or at least seemingly so at this point. Um, Iran's new president accused Israel on Monday of seeking a wider war in the Middle East and laying quote unquote traps to lead Iran into a broader conflict. Masoud Pezeshkian told about 24 journalists that Iran doesn't want to see the current war in Gaza and airstrikes across the Israeli-Lebanese border expand. Quote, "We don't want to fight," he said. "It's Israel that wants to drag everyone into war and destabilize the region. They are dragging us to a point where we do not wish to go," Pezeshkian, a heart surgeon and reformer, said. Well, that's what he's saying. Um, and everybody's saying something. And we're going to play in a little bit what Netanyahu had to say. But I don't think they want any part of this now, not because they don't want to fight, but because they don't have the means to fight, or at least seemingly so, which, of course, gives pause to the Russians and the Chinese. A key Ukrainian stronghold is about to fall. Having been in the United States since Sunday, Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky is about to present a victory plan to President Biden. He met with Biden, he met with Harris, he met with Trump, and that didn't go so well because there's tensions between Trump and Zelensky. And while he's talking about a victory plan, what's actually happening on the ground is the Russian army is continuing to move west across the Donetsk region, and the Ukrainian army is collapsing. An Ukrainian town of Vuldar, a stronghold that has resisted Russian attacks since the beginning of the war, is getting ready to fall. So the situation of the Ukrainians is getting worse and worse. And, what are people going to do when their backs are against the wall? We don't know. But what Vice President Harris is doing is she's blasting President Trump for being willing to consider peace. She slammed suggestions that the Ukrainians should cede territory for the sake of peace with Moscow as, quote, dangerous and unacceptable. The Democrat presidential nominee spoke alongside Zelensky as she unleashed the veiled criticism of President Trump and his push for Ukraine to quickly cut a deal to end the war. Quote, "These are not proposals for peace," she said. "Instead, they are proposals for surrender." Well, okay. Who are the warmongers now? If you're a leftist and you happen to be here watching this, and I notice these leftists always have these Ukrainian flags on their bios. They really seem to be into this. I don't know who you people are, but it has nothing to do with the left that I grew up with. You people are a world unto yourselves now. The movement, the peace movement, is over here with the Republicans because it's the philosophy of republicanism to avoid foreign entanglements. Republicanism is about human well-being, which is tough to achieve in a nuclear war. So I don't know where you people are at uh, ideologically. The labels don't mean anything. So I guess we're going to go back to the traditional concept of the left, not the American left of the 1960s. We had this kind, gentle hippie left. Nah, it ain't the hippies. This is not your hippie generation left. This is the traditional left of the Germans. We got the Nazis and the communists, and they're fighting it out on the streets. And what they want is authoritarianism. And we're going to keep presenting evidence of that in the podcast to come. Now, we're going to do something over the next 3 podcasts, which is quite time consuming. There was recently a gathering in New York of world leaders at the United Nations, and the United Nations gives each of them a chance to speak to the world. We don't listen to what these people have to say, and that's crazy because they're there to tell us what they think. Now, they could be lying, and there's going to be many of you that when we watch Benjamin Netanyahu are going to say he's BSing. But let's listen to the words that are coming out of his mouth. It's a long piece. It's 36 minutes. It's going to take up a lot of time, and then in the next podcast, we're going to do Sergei Lavrov from the Soviet Union, and then we're going to do the Chinese presentation. We need to look at what these people are saying to us. It's not meaningless. They're saying something important. So without further ado, Tanner, would you please play number 3?
The Assembly will hear an address by His Excellency Benjamin Netanyahu, Prime Minister of the State of Israel. I request protocol to escort His Excellency and invite him to address the Assembly. Order, please. Ladies and gentlemen, order.
Most of the body left the chamber.
Order, please.
Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, I didn't intend to come here this year. My country is at war, fighting for its life. But after I heard the lies and slanders leveled at my country by many of the speakers at this podium, I decided to come here and set the record straight. I decided to come here to speak for my people, to speak for my country, to speak for the truth. And here's the truth. Israel seeks peace. Israel yearns for peace. Israel has made peace and will make peace again. Yet we face savage enemies who seek our annihilation, and we must defend ourselves against these savage murderers. Our enemies seek not only to destroy us, they seek to destroy our common civilization and return all of us to a dark age of tyranny and terror. When I spoke here last year, I said we faced the same timeless choice that Moses put before the people of Israel thousands of years ago. As we were about to enter the Promised Land, Moses told us that our actions will determine whether we bequeath to future generations a blessing or a curse. And that is the choice we face today. The curse of Iran's unremitting aggression, or the blessing of a historic reconciliation between Arab and Jew. In the days that followed that speech, the blessing I spoke of came into sharper focus. A normalization deal between Saudi Arabia and Israel seemed closer than ever. But then came the curse of October 7th. Thousands of Iranian-backed Hamas terrorists from Gaza burst into Israel in pickup trucks, on motorcycles, and they committed unimaginable atrocities. They savagely murdered 1,200 people. They raped and mutilated women. They beheaded men. They burned babies alive. They burnt entire families alive, babies, children, parents, grandparents, in scenes reminiscent of the Nazi Holocaust. Hamas kidnapped 251 people from dozens of different countries, dragging them into the dungeons of Gaza. Israel has brought home 154 of these hostages, including 117 who returned alive. I want to assure you, we will not rest until the remaining hostages are brought home too. And some of their family members are here with us today. I ask you to stand up. With us is Eli Stevie, whose son Idan was abducted from the Nova Music Festival. That was his crime, a music festival. And these murderous monsters took him. Kobe Smirno, whose son Jonathan was murdered, and his corpse was taken into the dungeons, into the terror tunnels of Gaza, a corpse held hostage. Salim al-Atrash, whose brother Muhammad, a brave Arab-Israeli soldier, was murdered. His body too was taken to Gaza. And so was the body of Ifat Hyman's daughter in Bar, who was brutally murdered at that same music festival. With us is Sharon Sharabi, whose brother Yossi was murdered, and who prays for his older brother Eli, who is still held hostage in Gaza. And with us too is Izhar Lifsich from Kibbutz Nir Oz, a kibbutz that was wiped out by the terrorists. Thankfully, we achieved the release of his mother Yocheved, but his father Oded is still languishing in an underground terrorist hell of Hamas. I again promise you, we will return your loved ones home. We will not spare that effort until this holy mission is accomplished. Ladies and gentlemen, the curse of October 7th began when Hamas invaded Israel from Gaza, but it didn't end there. Israel was soon forced to defend itself on 6 more war fronts organized by Iran. On October 8th, Hezbollah attacked us from Lebanon. Since then, they fired over 8,000 rockets at our towns and cities, at our civilians, at our children. 2 weeks later, the Iran-backed Houthis in Yemen launched drones and missiles at Israel, the first of 250 such attacks, including one yesterday aimed at Tel Aviv. Iran's Shiite militias in Syria and Iraq have targeted Israel dozens of times over the past year as well. Fueled by Iran, Palestinian terrorists in Judea and Samaria perpetrated scores of attacks there and throughout Israel. And last April, for the first time ever, Iran directly attacked Israel from its own territory, firing 300 drones, cruise missiles, and ballistic missiles at us. I have a message for the tyrants of Tehran. If you strike us, we will strike you. There is no place in Iran that the long arm of Israel cannot reach, and that's true of the entire Middle East. Far from being lambs led to the slaughter, Israel's soldiers have fought back with incredible courage and with heroic sacrifice. And I have another message for this assembly and for the world outside this hall. We are winning. Ladies and gentlemen, as Israel defends itself against Iran in the seven-front war, the line separating the blessing and the curse could not be more clear. This is the map I presented here last year. It's a map of a blessing. It shows Israel and its Arab partners forming a land bridge connecting Asia and Europe between the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean Sea. Across this bridge, we will lay rail lines, energy pipelines, fiber optic cables, and this will serve the betterment of 2 billion people. Now look at this second map. It's a map. Look at the second map. It's a map of a curse. It's a map of an arc of terror that Iran has created and imposed from the Indian Ocean to the Mediterranean. Iran's malignant arc has shut down international waterways. It cuts off trade. It destroys millions, destroys nations from within, and inflicts misery on millions. On the one hand, a bright blessing, a future of hope. On the other hand, a dark future of despair.
Could you stop it just for a second?
Map,
So I think that Netanyahu, in this particular part of the speech, is representing the globalist idea that through trade, through intermodal corridors, and through the linking of Asia with Europe, we have a bright future of materialism. But if that's interrupted, we get the curse of conflict. So our choices here, which are being laid out for us, and I think Netanyahu's being a salesman. He's selling two visions of the future, one with plentiful material goods linking Europe and Asia through the Middle East, the other a future of barbarism and terrorism. Doesn't sound to me like this is his idea. It sounds to me like he's the salesman. Could you please continue?
is only a curse for Israel. If you think that, then you should think again. Because Iran's aggression, if it's not checked, will endanger every single country in the Middle East and many, many countries in the rest of the world. Because Iran seeks to impose its radicalism well beyond the Middle East. That's why it funds terror networks on 5 continents. That's why it builds ballistic missiles for nuclear warheads to threaten the entire world. For too long, the world has appeased Iran. It turns a blind eye to its internal repression. It turns a blind eye to its external aggression. Well, that appeasement must end. And that appeasement must end now. Nations of the world should support the brave people of Iran who want to rid themselves of this evil regime. Responsible governments should not only support Israel in rolling back Iran's aggression, they should join Israel. They should join Israel in stopping Iran's nuclear weapons program. In this body, in the Security Council, we're going to have a deliberation in a few months. And I call on the Security Council to snap back UN Security Council sanctions against Iran, because we must all do everything in our power to ensure that Iran never gets nuclear weapons. For decades, I've been warning the world against Iran's nuclear program. Our actions delayed this program by perhaps a decade, but we haven't stopped it. We've delayed it, but we haven't stopped it. Iran now seeks to weaponize its nuclear program for the sake of the peace and security of all your countries. For the sake of the peace and security of the entire world, we must not let that happen. And I assure you, Israel will do everything in its power to make sure it doesn't happen. So, ladies and gentlemen, the question before us is simple. Which of these two maps that I showed you will shape our future? Will it be the blessings of peace and prosperity for Israel, our Arab partners, and the rest of the world? Or will it be the curse in which Iran and its proxies spread carnage and chaos everywhere? Israel has already made its choice. We've decided to advance the blessing. We're building a partnership for peace with our Arab neighbors while fighting the forces of terror that threaten that peace. For nearly a year, the brave men and women of the IDF have been systematically crushing Hamas's terror army that once ruled Gaza. On October 7th, the day of that invasion into Israel, that terror army numbered nearly 40,000 terrorists. It was armed with more than 15,000 rockets. It had 350 miles of terror tunnels, an underground network bigger than the New York subway system, which they used to wreak havoc above and below ground. A year later, the IDF has killed or captured more than half of these terrorists, destroyed over 90% of their rocket arsenal, and eliminated the key segments of their terror tunnel network. In major military operations, we destroyed nearly all of Hamas's terror battalions, 23 out of 24 battalions. Now, to complete our victory, we are focused on mopping up Hamas's remaining fighting capabilities. We are taking out senior terrorist commanders and destroying remaining terrorist infrastructure. But all the while, and I'll say this one more time, we remain focused on our sacred mission, bringing our hostages home, and we will not stop until that mission is complete. Now, ladies and gentlemen, even with Hamas's greatly diminished military capability, the terrorists still exercise some governing power in Gaza by stealing the food that we enable aid agencies to bring into Gaza. Hamas steals the food, and then they hike the prices. They feed their bellies, and then they fill their coffers with money that they extort from their own people. They sell the stolen food at exorbitant prices. And that's how they stay in power. Well, this too has to end, and we're working to bring it to an end. And the reason is simple. Because if Hamas stays in power, it will regroup, rearm, and attack Israel again and again and again, as it is vowed to do. So Hamas has got to go. Just imagine, for those who say, well, Hamas has to stay, it has to be part of a post-war Gaza, imagine in a post-war situation in World War II, imagine allowing the defeated Nazis in 1945 to rebuild Germany. It's inconceivable, it's ridiculous. It didn't happen then, it's not going to happen now. This is why Israel will reject any rule for Hamas in a post-war Gaza. We don't seek to resettle Gaza. What we seek is a demilitarized and de-radicalized Gaza. Only then can we ensure that this round of fighting will be the last round of fighting. We are ready to work with regional and other partners to support a local civilian administration in Gaza committed to peaceful coexistence. As for the hostages, I have a message for the Hamas captors. Let them go. Let them go. All of them. Those alive today must be returned alive, and the remains of those whom you brutally killed must be returned to their families. Those families here with us today, and others in Israel, deserve to have a resting place for their loved ones, a place where they can grieve and remember them. This war, ladies and gentlemen, this war can come to an end now. All that has to happen is for Hamas to surrender, lay down its arms, and release all the hostages. But if they don't, we will fight until we achieve victory, total victory. There is no substitute for it.
Can you stop, please? Okay, so what Netanyahu has presented here is that this war will continue until there's a total victory. He is presenting the idea that this is the regional war to end all war in the region. Please continue.
Israel must also defeat Hezbollah in Lebanon. Hezbollah is the quintessential terror organization in the world today. It has tentacles that span in all continents. It has murdered more Americans and more Frenchmen than any group except bin Laden. It's murdered the citizens of many countries represented in this room. And it has attacked Israel viciously over the last 20 years, in the last year, completely unprovoked. A day after Hamas massacre, on October 7th, Hezbollah began attacks against Israel, which forced more than 60,000 Israelis on our northern border to leave their homes, becoming refugees in their own land. Hezbollah turned vibrant towns in the north of Israel into ghost towns. So I want you to think about this in equivalent American terms. Just imagine if terrorists turned El Paso and San Diego into ghost towns. Then ask yourself, how long would the American government tolerate that? A day? A week? A month? I doubt they tolerate it even for a single day. Yet Israel has been tolerating this intolerable situation for nearly a year. Well, I've come here today to say, enough is enough. We won't rest until our citizens can return safely to their homes. We will not accept a terror army perched on our northern border, able to perpetrate another October 7th style massacre. For 18 years, Hezbollah brazenly refused to implement UN Security Council Resolution 1701, which requires it to move its forces away from our borders. Instead, Hezbollah moved right up to our border. They secretly dug terror tunnels to infiltrate our communities and indiscriminately fired thousands of rockets into our towns and villages. They fire these rockets and missiles not from military sites, not from that. They do that too. But they fire those rockets and missiles after they place them in schools, in hospitals, in apartment buildings, and in the private homes of the citizens of Lebanon. They endanger their own people. They put a missile in every kitchen, a rocket in every garage. I said to the people of Lebanon this week, get out of the death trap that Hezbollah has put you in. Don't let NASRALLAH drag Lebanon into the abyss. We're not at war with you. We're at war with Hezbollah, which has hijacked your country and threatens to destroy ours. As long as Hezbollah chooses the path of war, Israel has no choice, and Israel has every right to remove this threat and return our citizens to their homes safely. And that's exactly what we're doing. Just this week, the IDF destroyed large percentages of Hezbollah's rockets, which it built with Iran's funding for 3 decades. We took out senior military commanders who not only shed Israeli blood, but American and French blood as well. And then we took out their replacements, and then the replacements of their replacements. And we'll continue degrading Hezbollah until all our objectives are met. Ladies and gentlemen, we're committed to removing the curse of terrorism that threatens all civilized societies. But to truly realize the blessing of a new Middle East, We must continue the path we paved with the Abraham Accords 4 years ago. Above all, this means achieving a historic peace agreement between Israel and Saudi Arabia. And having seen the blessings that we've already brought with the Abraham Accords, the millions of Israelis who've already flown back and forth across the Arabian Peninsula, over the skies of Saudi Arabia, to the Gulf countries, the trade, the tourism, the joint ventures, the peace. I say to you, what blessings such a peace with Saudi Arabia would bring. It would be a boon to the security and economy of our two countries. It would boost trade and tourism across the region. It would help transform the Middle East into a global juggernaut. Our two countries could cooperate on energy, water, agriculture, artificial intelligence, and many, many other fields. Such a peace, I'm sure, would be a true pivot of history. It would usher in a historic reconciliation between the Arab world and Israel, between Islam and Judaism, between Mecca and Jerusalem. While Israel is committed to achieving such a peace, Iran and its terror proxies are committed to scuttling it. That's why one of the best ways to foil Iran's nefarious designs is to achieve the peace. Such a peace would be the foundation for an even broader Abrahamic alliance. And that alliance would include the United States, Israel's current Arab peace partners, Saudi Arabia, and others who choose the blessing of peace. It would advance security and prosperity across the Middle East and bring enormous benefits to the rest of the world. With American support and leadership, I believe this vision can materialize, and much sooner than people think. And as the Prime Minister of Israel, I will do everything in my power to make it happen. This is an opportunity that we and the world should not let go by.
The Saudis were not there.
Ladies and gentlemen, Israel has made its choice. We seek to move forward to a bright age of prosperity and peace. Iran and its proxies have also made their choice. They want to move back to a dark age of terror and war. And now I have a question. And I pose that question to you. What choice will you make? Will your nation stand with Israel? Will you stand with democracy and peace? Or will you stand with Iran, a brutal dictatorship that subjugates its own people, exports terrorism across the globe? In this battle between good and evil, there must be no equivocation. When you stand with Israel, you stand for your own values and your own interests. Yes, we're defending ourselves, but we're also defending you against a common enemy that through violence and terror seeks to destroy our way of life. So there should be no confusion about this. But unfortunately, there is a lot of it in many countries and in this very hall, as I've just heard. Good is portrayed as evil, and evil is portrayed as good. We see this moral confusion
Can you stop it for a
when
second?
Israel is falsely.
This is one of those very interesting comments. Good is portrayed as evil and evil is portrayed as good. And I go back to my street corner metaphor. It really depends on what street corner you're standing on. Please continue.
Accused of genocide when we defend ourselves against enemies who try to commit genocide against us. We see this too when Israel is absurdly accused by the ICC prosecutor of deliberately starving Palestinians in Gaza. What an absurdity. We helped bring in 700,000 tons of food into Gaza. That's more than 3,000 calories a day for every man, woman, and child in Gaza. We see this moral confusion when Israel is falsely accused of deliberately targeting civilians. We don't want to see a single person, a single innocent person die. That's always a tragedy. And that's why we do so much to minimize civilian casualties, even as our enemies use civilians as human shields. And no army has done what Israel is doing to minimize civilian casualties. We drop flyers, we send text messages, we make phone calls by the millions to ensure that Palestinian civilians get out of harm's way. We spare no effort in this noble pursuit. We see yet another profound moral confusion when self-described progressives march against the democracy of Israel. Don't they realize they support the Iranian-backed goons in Tehran and in Gaza, the goons who gun down protesters, murder women for not covering their hair, and hang gays in public squares, some progressives. According to the U.S. Director of National Intelligence, Iran funds and fuels many of the protesters against Israel. Who knows, maybe some of the protesters, or even many of the protesters outside this building now.
Stop it for just a second. For the progressives that might be watching, NASRALLAH Must Die is the title of tonight's podcast. You can go online and you'll find that he recently called for violence against gay people. Please continue.
Ladies and gentlemen, King Solomon, who reigned in our eternal capital, Jerusalem, 3,000 years ago, proclaimed something that is familiar to all of you. He said, "There is nothing new under the sun." Well, in an age of space travel, quantum physics, and artificial intelligence, some would argue that's a debatable statement. But one thing is undeniable. There is definitely nothing new at the United Nations. Take it from me. I first spoke from this podium as Israel's ambassador to the UN in 1984. That's exactly 40 years ago. And in my maiden speech here, I think it's the same podium, by the way. In my maiden speech here, I spoke against a proposal to expel Israel from this body. 4 decades later, I find myself defending Israel against that same preposterous proposal. And who's leading the charge this time? Not Hamas, but Abbas, Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas. This is the man who claims he wants peace with Israel. Yet he still refuses to condemn the horrific massacre of October 7th. He's still paying hundreds of millions to terrorists who murder Israelis and Americans. It's called pay for slay. The more you murder, the more you get paid. And he still wages unremitting diplomatic warfare against Israel's right to exist and against Israel's right to defend itself. And by the way, they amount to the same thing. Because if you can't defend yourself, you can't exist. Not in our neighborhood, certainly, and maybe not in yours. Standing in this podium 40 years ago, I told the sponsors of that outrageous resolution to expel Israel, "Gentlemen, check your fanaticism at the door." Today, I tell President Abbas and all of you who would shamefully support that resolution, check your fanaticism at the door. The singling out of the one and only Jewish state continues to be a moral stain on the United Nations. It has made this once respected institution contemptible in the eyes of decent people everywhere. But for the Palestinians, this UN House of Darkness is home court. They know that in this swamp of anti-Semitic bile, there's an automatic majority willing to demonize the Jewish state on anything. In this anti-Israel, flat earth society, any false charge, any outlandish allegation can muster a majority. In the last decade, there have been more resolutions passed against Israel in this hall at the UN General Assembly than against the entire world combined. Actually, more than twice as many. Since 2014, this body condemned Israel 174 times. It condemned all the other countries in the world 73 times. That's more than 100 extra condemnations for the Jewish state. What hypocrisy, What a double standard. What a joke. So the UN's hostility. So all the speeches you heard today, all the hostility directed at Israel this year, it's not about Gaza. It's about Israel. It's always been about Israel's very existence. And I say to you, until Israel, until the Jewish state is treated like other nations, until this anti-Semitic swamp is drained, the UN will be viewed by fair-minded people everywhere as nothing more than a contemptuous farce. Now, given the anti-Semitism at the UN, it should surprise no one that the prosecutor at the ICC, one of the UN's affiliated organs, is considering issuing arrest warrants against me and Israel's defense minister, the democratically elected leaders of the democratic state of Israel. The ICC prosecutors rushed to judgment. His refusal to treat Israel with its independent courts the way other democracies are treated is hard to explain by anything other than pure anti-Semitism. Ladies and gentlemen, the real war criminals are not in Israel. They're in Iran. They're in Gaza, in Syria, in Lebanon, in Yemen. Those of you who stand with these war criminals, those of you who stand with evil against good, with a curse against the blessing, those of you who do so should be ashamed of yourselves. But I have a message for you. Israel will win this battle. We'll win this battle because we don't have a choice. After generations in which our people were slaughtered, remorselessly butchered, and no one raised a finger in our defense, we now have a state. We now have a brave army, an army of incomparable courage, and we are defending ourselves. As the book of Samuel says in the Bible, Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker. The eternity of Israel will not falter. In the Jewish people's epic journey from antiquity, in our odyssey through the tempest and upheavals of modern times, that ancient promise has always been kept, and it will hold true for all time. To borrow a great poet's phrase, Israel will not go gently into that good night. We will never need to rage against the dying of the light, because the torch of Israel will forever shine bright. To the people of Israel and to the soldiers of Israel, I say, be strong and of good courage. חזקו ואמצו ואל תיראו מפניהם, כי אדוני אלוהיך הוא ההולך עמך, לא ירפך ולא יעזבך. Am Yisrael Chai, the people of Israel live now, tomorrow, forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Tanner. I know that was a long journey into the UN, but you know, that's an international body, and these leaders go there and speak, and we don't listen to them, or we get sound bites. I'm going to let you think about what you just heard, and we'll comment on it further in the podcast to come. Again, we're going to play the Russian presentation, the Chinese presentation in the podcasts that are coming. It takes a lot of time, but if we don't do the source material is right here. The source material is right here for us to listen to. We don't have to listen to it on the news. We've got our own documentary evidence so we can make our own decisions and be moved by what we hear. So this is a thesis. We're going to hear some other countries give their opinions about these issues, and we can try to sort this out. We're at a moment where we're recognizing there's a Gordian knot here. What's a Gordian knot? It's a knot that can't be severed. And there's a beautiful piece of poetry that was written by Nikita Khrushchev about Gordian knots. And I've read it before, and it's worth reading again because it really applies to this particular crisis. If you did this as the first steps towards the unleashing of war, well, then it is evident that nothing else is left to us but to accept this challenge of yours. If, however, you have not lost your self control and sensibly conceive what this might lead to, then, Mr. President, we and you ought not now to pull on the ends of the rope in which you have tied the knot of war, because the more the two of us pull, the tighter the knot will be tied. And a moment may come when that knot will be tied so tight that even he who tried it will not have the strength to untie it. And then it will be necessary to cut the knot. And what that would mean is not for me to explain to you, because you yourself understand perfectly of the terrible forces our countries dispose. Consequently, if there is no intention to tighten that knot and thereby to doom the world to the catastrophe of thermonuclear war, then let us not only relax the forces pulling on the ends of the rope, let us take measures to untie that knot. We are ready for this. That's Nikita Khrushchev in 1963. Sometimes I think about how to make the podcast grow, what people want to hear, what people want to see, how to be popular. Because, of course, here I am. I've gone through a whole podcast. I didn't even think about Free People's Store, Target.com. I'm so focused on the work. And I do things against my own economic benefit or the benefit of growing the podcast because it's difficult to listen to that. But what are we going to do if we don't hear it ourselves? You have a chance now to make your own decision. Play through that several times. Try to figure out what's propaganda, what's real. What do you want to believe about it? Because it's your belief about it. And we're continuously being fed one-liners about what this means and what that means. If we're going to self-govern, we have to have our own internal decision about what it is we believe about this terrible Gordian knot. Now, I'm really struggling with this. I'm really trying to come up with something profound. And what's going to happen is, as more and more of us look at this problem and try to come up with an answer to it, something profound, the answer will emerge. Just not yet. Just not yet. What's happening now today is the war is widening. The line of conflict from the Ukraine down to Gaza is more intense minute by minute. The world hangs in the balance. My life hangs in the balance. The lives of my children hang in the balance. And we can't even get 100% of the American people to the polls to vote. But let me just make it very clear from my street corner. A vote for the Democrats is a vote for war. They've become the party of the military-industrial complex, the medical-industrial complex, the university-industrial complex, the entertainment-industrial complex. That party controls and is controlled by the forces of the left, of communism, of destruction. Because, of course, the communist movement is really just a tool of the money. And I know you leftists don't understand that. You don't want to believe that, but that's too bad. Do your homework. We've got the republicanism of the right. We believe in human well-being, that the individual is sovereign, that war is to be avoided, that we are to remove ourselves from foreign entanglements. It's a very stark difference. I'm not going to get caught up in the people. I'm going to focus on the ideas. I'm going to vote for peace, and I'm going to ask you to do the same. And let me tell you what I'm going to do as we go out. I have a bucket list of things that I want to do. I've been thinking about this for 40 years because this isn't the first time I was looking at being killed. It's just the most recent one. And I know that sounds extreme, but hey, when people start talking like this in a Gordian knot, and they're not going to stop until victory is achieved, someone might decide to push back on this. And if that happens, oh, you know what? I hope you have your emergency food. But there's certain music that I want to listen to at the end of my life. And one of them is a Mozart symphony that we're going to go out with. It's the first movement of a great symphony, Symphony Number 41. It's beautiful. I've played it before. I'm going to share it with you. It's a nice counterpoint to the very serious tone of tonight's podcast. I want to thank you for joining. I look forward to seeing you on Thursday night. I hope you're well. Thank you very much.
Thank